So we're going to pick up with auditing. So we've looked at monitoring, which is what's going on in the system, hopefully near real time. Auditing deals more with what's going on in the past, or what has gone on in the past. So common tasks that an administrator would have to do here is interpret the needs of the customer, take the standard reports, possibly customize them for the customer's needs, possibly modify or reconfigure auditing to capture more events, additional events, less events. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about now. So in your rearview mirror, you have all of the activity that's gone on in your system. All of this data has been accumulated, cleansed, and we have the ability to control what events are reported on. So hopefully new in VIA we have this event-driven architecture where activity that goes on in the applications and with the data and with the reports is recorded. Those events are sent through the message queues, and the message queues can then surface the information to consumer processes that pull off the relevant information that we're interested in. So by default, you get a series of reports. We get 6 of them that deal with the system itself, and 1 that deals with user activity. Okay? So out of the box, we give you some things to play with. All of the reports that deal with system activity are structured pretty much the same. So if we look at one here, this is just looking at general system activity. You'll notice across the top we have various tabs for aspects of system activity. So CPU, that sort of thing. Just below the tabs we have a push button for each of our machines. So in this one report I can look at the system activity through time on all 5 or 6 of my machines, which is kind of powerful. There's a slider there for time. So by default, that's going to span 3 days. So you can look at any activity. If you need to blow up a problematic period of time, you can set the slider to a certain range. Really interesting stuff. And again, just a reminder that behind the scenes, the operations infrastructure is what's surfacing this information to my report. So behind the scenes, the SAS peak, the SAS checks, they're all running constantly, generating information to the message queues, and then my stream is pulling that information off, cleansing it, putting it into a data mart so that I can report on it in CAS. Okay. Now, if you want to plug in, just like we saw with the logs option, the SAS Ops metrics would allow me to plug into the metrics exchange and see in real time all of the metrics that are flowing through the system. Okay. Now, it's not just a number coming through, it's a lot of information. As Jerry said earlier, it's standardized on JSON, so you'd have a JSON package of information that's coming through the exchange. But again, if you're interested in metrics, we can certainly use this command to pull information out, grep it for what we're interested in, and possibly pipe that to a third party if we're interested in feeding something like Tivoli or OpenView, some of the other monitoring software. Right. Now, the one user activity report is similar. So across the top, I have various components of user activity. I no longer have machines because I don't really care which machine they were using. I just want to know what the users were doing. But again, I have a slider so I can look at the span of time if I'm interested in it, and kind of the, who's the most active user, what reports were opened, what tables were opened, that sort of thing. And again, this comes from the auditing information, which is coming through the operations infrastructure, and I have the ability to look at that information in a raw format if I just use the SAS admin with the audit list options. All right, so by default, I get metrics for 3 days. Right? So I'm looking at performance information for my machines at a 3-day interval. I'm looking at user information over 7 days, a rolling 7. So after 8 days, the old day rolls off and the new day comes in. Again, configurable, anything you want to change. The ops dmadmin command is how we do that, of course. So in this case, we've highlighted the retained days at 3. If I want to set that to a 7-day period so that the metrics match my user activity, right? I simply have to run the command again with the set option and specify the configuration value that I'm interested in. Okay. Now, we're talking about auditing, and earlier we looked at the tasks that the operations agent server agent runs. In this case, we're looking at that list again. We've highlighted the gen audit, and as you can see to the far right, we have a 2-hour frequency. So every 2 hours, this task runs, it cleans up the information that's been pulled off the exchanges, reports on it, and puts it into CAS. Okay. Now, is that frequent enough? Too frequent? I don't know. It kind of depends on your customer's needs. So if you need to change that, you can take the tasks from any of the agents, you can export them into a JSON file. So here we've dumped it out into a tasks.json file. And each one of those tasks, I think there were 12 or 13, will have a section of the file defining the frequency of the job, what happens if it encounters an error, what are the commands that need to be run as part of that task, and so on. So all we have to do is edit the JSON. So here we've set the frequency to be 30 minutes. So I want it to run every 30 minutes. I'll give it 25 minutes to run. And if it errors out after 20 minutes or times out, I want to ignore that. I'll just kick it off again the next 5 minutes. Right? So again, all these things are at your discretion. You can change the values as you see fit. In this particular case, we're bumping up the number of days we keep around of auditing information to be 10 instead of 7. So once you edit the file, you then import the definition back into console where they're stored, and then we simply have to restart the agent. And when the agent starts, it'll pick that information back up. And remember, there's only one of these running in our deployment. So if I change the auditing information, I really only have to concern myself with one of my machines. So what gets audited? There is a microservice that is responsible for pulling information off of the message queues and persisting that information in Postgres. So oddly enough, it's called the audit service. And it has 2 primary components that we need to configure. One is the archive, and the other is the audit record. So the archive dictates what happens to old auditing information. Right? Now, those of you who dealt with SAS 9 and the service architecture framework, you knew that a lot of this information kept getting persisted. It would fill up the disks, potentially. So this is a much more customer-friendly way of self-maintaining the data mart. Okay. So as you can see, and maybe not, you can turn off the auditing. So the very top button there, if you don't care about auditing, it's very easy to disable. But the options we're interested in as far as archiving go are the local retention, and that dictates how long I keep records around for. So the TSV files that I'm going to accumulate over time. So by default, it's 7 days. You can set that to anything you wish. 30 days, a year, but keep in mind that whatever you set here does have an impact on the disk utilization that we have for the TSV files. Now what happens to the old records? Right? By default, storage type is set to none, which says on the 8th day, when I have old records that I want to get rid of, I just get rid of them. They don't get saved anywhere. Right? Now that's not going to work for every customer, obviously. So you can set storage type to local and specify a location, so those aged records will then go into a file where you can maintain them, archive them off for posterity and further research, perhaps. Okay. But by default, we just get rid of old records. We assume that you don't want them. Questions there? Right. Okay, so what gets audited? Right? We have lots of things going on in the system. We have people logging in. We have people logging off, people doing all kinds of activity. The audit record configuration dictates what is pulled off of the exchange and kept around for reporting purposes. Okay. So, for example, we have, in this case, 2 areas that we can configure. Down at the bottom, you have a type. And this is more of a generic event that you're interested in. For example, as you see here, and maybe you can make it out in your PDF, the 2 that are defined are resources and security. So resource deals with objects. Right? Did I do something to a report? Security deals with, obviously, security-related events. Did I try to log in and I couldn't log in? Right? So those things are captured by default. Occasionally, we need to dictate what happens to a specific event for a specific service. So, for example, a lot of customers are interested in knowing when a report is opened. Right? How many times was it read? So, in that case, I don't really want to know every read event that happens in the system. That would just overwhelm my reporting. What I want to know is, for the report service, when was a read successful? Okay? So that's what the 2 options are there at the top, where we have an application event structure. So we enable the read event, and then we say we want the report action read state success events. And the options there are success, failure, and all. So if you want success and failure, it's easy to get. So as you can imagine, this is going to take a little bit of artistry. Right? We have to work with the customer to find out which events they want, which ones we can surface. The structure of the application events is pretty standard. So you have the application name, you have the word action, and then you have an event. And there are about 7 events that you can specify. Right? Read, update, create, delete, that sort of thing. And then you have a state of that action. So they're fairly standardized across all the microservices. What happens when something goes wrong? So occasionally, not very often, but we do have instances where the auditing is not refreshed. So I have an audit table in memory, but I'm not seeing the new records added in. They've made it very easy to reset the auditing by simply deleting a directory, or the contents of a directory, I should say. Don't delete the directory. So if you go to the operations infrastructure server that's running our agent, you see the directory there, and that's where the actual tables are stored for the auditing. So if I delete it, the next time Gen Audit runs, it will recreate everything it needs. So it's just a real easy way to kind of reset things, make sure that the system is up and reporting on most recent information. All right, so it's your chance. So what you're going to do in this exercise is you're going to configure auditing. You're going to add in some events. You're going to change the frequency for auditing. Now you're going to bump it down to, I think, 15 minutes. So there is a chance that you do things so quickly that it doesn't have a chance to run. So what we're going to do is go through the changes, make all the configuration modifications, and then if you don't see something come up right away, certainly by the next hands-on, you'll have an opportunity to see the results of your changes.